Welcome to Politics for Happy People, where we have fun conversations about serious issues in politics and culture. I'm your host, Ashley Vaughan.
And I'm your other host, Joseph Backholm. So good that you are with us today on what I think is our second episode. So we're off and running. Hello, Mom. Ashley, how you feeling?
Feeling pretty good. New skill unlocked. Podcast host.
That's exactly right. And, because everybody, you might be the only person in the world who didn't previously have a podcast. So now you do.
That's right.
And so you have joined the list of podcasters. And hopefully we make it through more than like 2 or 3. And I think we're going to.
We're going to do it.
But this is, as we begin this particular venture, we are trying to help people, and particularly for our audience, people in North Carolina, kind of get oriented as to what is happening in the world and how do we navigate this. And today we're going to learn some things from the Supreme Court, or rather from the people who have been to the Supreme Court recently, because I think there's a series of cases that kind of tell an interesting story when we look at them all together about the state of the world that we live in, the concerns, the threats, how it's impacting the family. And so today we're going to run through some of those cases. And Ashley, let's start with Childs. I think you know something about Childs.
Yes, that's right. So this is an interesting case, and it's the most recent case. We got a decision at the end of March. And this case is about a counselor in Colorado. In 2019, Colorado passed a law that basically it censored her speech and restricted what she could say to her clients in those private counseling sessions that she was having with them. So she is a licensed counselor, and the state of Colorado was telling her basically that she could only, if she was talking to a client who had confusion about their gender or questions about their gender identity, she could only tell that client things to affirm the confusion, basically, to help them along that path of discovering what they thought their new identity should be, but that she could not help them realign their emotions and their feelings about who they are and their body with their physical reality.
They refer to this as the underlying law is referred to as a conversion therapy ban. And
that's a loaded term.
It is, but I mean, I think we need to say it just
to
understand and help people unpack how loaded it is, because that's what people have probably heard about.
Yes.
Conversion therapy, it's torture. Shame on you. Of course, we don't want therapists torturing kids.
Of course not. Yes. So there is a history associated with that. And without getting too much into the weeds of the details, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you did have attempts to physically do physical procedures to convert someone in terms of their sexuality or their gender identity. But this case is specifically talking about, or specifically addressing, talk therapy. So, and that is one of the hearts of the issue here, because what Kaylee Childs was doing was talking to her clients. She wasn't doing any sort of a procedure or physical intervention.
She's a therapist.
Exactly.
Therapists don't do surgeries. They talk to people. But the proponents of the law, and I actually have some personal history with this, because I was working in, not as a client. I have never, for the record, undergone conversion therapy.
Okay.
By God's grace,
Glad
that has not been something I have dealt with in my own life. But no, I've dealt with this issue politically.
Okay.
Washington State was one of the first states to adopt a conversion therapy bill, and part of my history is I used to do this work in the state of Washington, and there was legislation to stop quote-unquote conversion therapy. And they would talk about ice baths and shock treatments.
Nausea-inducing
and
medications.
Yes, all of this, rubber bands on the wrists, and we're going to, every time you have this thought, we're going to do something to inflict a little pain to, reprogram your brain. Things that, and some of them were genuinely terrible, the stories that they told, some of which were certainly not true and were later proven not to be true. Some of which probably were true because bad things have happened in the past and we don't have to deny all that, right?
Right.
So they were telling all these stories in the legislature about actual child abuse, and some of which might have actually been true. But
that it happened in the past.
Correct.
But not that it was happening in the...
That it's a bad thing.
Right.
Child abuse is a bad thing.
Right.
There are therapists in the past who had a really kind of erroneous, also not biblical understanding of kind of this issue and how to deal with it, right? So they did some bad things and people were saying, hey, we don't want this to happen. And everybody hears these stories and like, of course we don't want 11-year-olds put in ice baths against their will as a way to reprogram their mind. Not only does it not work, it's terrible, right?
Right.
So that was the effort in Washington State. And we were like, nobody wants child abuse, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to censor particular speech. And so we actually passed a bill because at this point, the Republicans controlled the Senate at that point and the Democrats controlled the House. And there was a bill passed to ban all of the abuse that they were talking about very explicitly. And that passed. And it was sent over as a substitute to the House where the Democrats were in control and said, hey, we agree with you. Let's stop all the abuse. Let's make sure that can't happen.
The Republicans and the Democrats agreed.
In the Senate.
Okay.
Passed it over to the House and said, hey, we want to stop all this abuse you've been telling all these stories about. Did they pass the bill? They did not. Why? Because what they really wanted to do was stop the speech, because the bill that stopped the actual physical abuse did not allow them to censor speech. They would not pass something to stop the abuse if they could not sponsor the speech. I think we called their bluff, because really what we exposed is this was always about stopping people's speech. They just didn't get the support they wanted when they said, hey, we want to punish you for saying things we don't like. So they're going to say, we're going to punish you for torturing kids, but we're also going to censor speech at the same time.
And that really is at the heart of the decision behind this case, which was an 8-1 decision in favor of Childs. And what the Supreme Court essentially said is this case is an issue of speech. And because the opposing argument was that her speech was a form of conduct or treatment, but they said, no, this falls under speech.
Right.
And I think it's important to note that we should want our professionals to have free speech. We should, that should be one of the most important places where we would want to have debate and multiple options, the marketplace of ideas. I think one thing that it can get lost in this is that there are clients, there are families, there are children and individuals who are seeking the kind of treatment that Kaylee Childs is trying to provide. And if you outlaw it, then they cannot get the treatment that they prefer.
And that's a really important point, because very often the clients looking, because we're talking, there's two contexts, right? There's same-sex attraction, which is very controversial, and increasingly now it's like this gender identity issue. And the proponents of these conversion therapy bans want a world in which a 13-year-old who experiences gender dysphoria, it's like, I'm a boy, but I kind of feel like a girl, but I'd really like to feel comfortable with the body that God gave me. They go to a therapist with that offer, and the state of Colorado is saying, therapist, you may not help that child achieve the therapeutic outcome they have requested because
their goal. Exactly.
And
the client's stated goal. And whether you call it speech or treatment or whatnot, the point is that this isn't a surgery or a physical intervention. This is a conversation. And it for the government to step in and say, you can have this kind of conversation, but you can't have that conversation, is a very, very basic violation, of free speech.
Another application of why it's problematic when the government tries to tell the medical professionals, this is what you shall think about this. We just lived through COVID. right? We all have trauma associated with COVID, and we all know what it was like to have the politicians tell the medical professionals who are in the process of learning, hopefully, right? Because this is issues of first impression. We don't know. We haven't been through this particular virus before. There's a lot we don't know about this. And the politicians within weeks were saying, there's only one thing that you're allowed to think about this, and anybody who doesn't think that is going to be punished. And this is a different application of that same mindset of you must think this or else there will be professional or personal consequences.
Yes, I will never forget Anthony Fauci. I am the science.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the hubris. And it's not that Anthony Fauci doesn't know anything, right?
Of course he does.
It's the attitude of, I know everything that there is to know, and anybody who proposes a different
there's a term in medicine. It's called premature closure. You know, you decide this is what the patient has before you look at all of the factors, and then you're on the wrong track because you've closed your mind to other options. Right. And we can get into trouble in the area of science when we have premature closure and we don't look at all the facts. But yeah, I mean, I think going back to this child's case, you know, one of the really important things to remember here is that people need to have options, and they need to be able to pursue their individual goals. And that is what this Colorado law was preventing. And I think another important factor to remember is that oftentimes when children or anyone presents with gender dysphoria, gender confusion, questions about their gender identity, there are other underlying factors that need to be addressed. And it's very, very complicated. So giving a monolithic, this is how we handle these situations, is very inappropriate from a clinical perspective.
And when you say people should have options, that is something, you know, you poll test that statement, everybody's going to say yes. Understanding the reason why in this particular situation, the left does not want you to have options is really important, right? The state of the mind of the movement in the world we live in is what we're trying to understand. Because in general, people will agree that when I go to my therapist, I should be free to have them help me with the thing that I'm struggling with. And everybody will be like, yeah. But then you give them the details. Well, of course not in that case, because that's what the sexual revolutionaries have rewritten the rules in this case. Thou shalt have choice, thou shalt have options, unless the thing that you want to choose or the option you prefer is one that is personally offensive to us. Because I think in this case, they need to shut off the possibility that gender dysphoria is not beautiful and natural and healthy. So if there is anyone who overcomes their gender dysphoria and becomes comfortable with the body that God gave them, the question is that the preferred outcome for everyone? And the world they need us to live in is a world in which everyone celebrates the possibility that boys start taking chemicals, turning themselves into girls, and eventually cut off their genitals so they can pretend to be women. That's the outcome that they need everybody to celebrate. And the possibility that that isn't necessary or even the best outcome is a possibility they don't want to consider. Therefore, we're going to punish you for having that conversation.
Yeah, it really does. Just at the end of the day, it goes back to very, very different views of the conditions that will produce thriving. The argument that gets used against people like Kaylee Childs is that she's somehow harming these children by not letting them, live authentically. Yeah, live with who they really should be. And yet we know that is not in any way her intention. Her intention is to help her clients and to help them achieve their goals and to help them live thriving lives. And the bottom line is there is a huge divide in our country about how to achieve that. And again, the government should not be stepping in and saying, this is the side that is right and this is the side that is wrong, and the side that is wrong, you can't talk anymore.
Related, the next case I want to get to
Yeah.
is the Scarametti case out of Tennessee. And it's related to conversion therapy and gender identity and all those things, because Tennessee had passed a law that said you cannot perform gender modifying, I would refer to them as gender denying surgeries. They would refer to them as gender affirming surgeries.
Surgery to change someone's
genitalia.
right.
And then the related chemicals that they take in order to
Right.
like masculinize or feminize
Right.
a particular body, right?
Puberty
We all know what
blockers and
we're referring
hormones
to.
and all the rest.
But
Yeah.
the language war around here is really important. But Tennessee passed a law saying you can't do that to minors. And that was consistent with what the public thought. It was obviously consistent with what the majority of their elected officials thought. And people brought a go ahead.
North Carolina also has such a law.
Well, 26 states now, I believe, have laws
Yes.
On that particular issue. Yes. So it is become a movement. And that's
Right.
one of the blue state, red state divides. Shall we cut off children's genitals in pursuit of treating their mental health issues? That's now a partisan difference. But the Supreme Court, when asked, said it is permissible to ban those treatments for children, that there is a rational reason to believe that. And to me, the most remarkable thing about that is that anybody with a straight face could go to the Supreme Court and say there is a constitutional right for children to have their genitals removed by doctors when they have mental distress.
Right. And it resolved this for me, though, Joseph. We're saying before that we think people should have options. Why do we not want them to have an option here? Why are we saying, okay, we're not going to chop off body parts of children or give them drugs that change the chemicals in their bodies?
It's a very fair question, because we're going to get it, because it raises parental rights issues, right?
Yeah.
And so that is something that we conservatives, we are very big on parental rights. And so the one of the primary arguments that was made in opposition to this law is, hey, you're infringing on the parental rights of parents in Tennessee.
The rights of parents who want their children
Yes.
gender to be changed.
Who want their body to be modified, who want them
Right.
to take all these
Right.
chemicals. Why is that not something that parents should be allowed to do?
Mm-hmm.
And this ultimately comes down to your understanding of what is healthy and what is good. Now, we all recognize that parents cannot consent to, they can't beat their children and claim I have the parental right to do it. You can't do things that are unambiguously, and I would argue this is abusive, but the things that we would all agree are abusive. Right. Parents don't have a right to do anything they want to their child. So really the question boils down to who gets to define what is helpful and what is harmful. And can a parent do anything they want to their child that they think is helpful, or can the state say, no, that is unambiguously as a moral, scientific reality, not helpful, like it would be if you were to abuse your child in some other way? Are those parallels? And so therefore we have the right to stop that. And so do parental rights always win? We like parental rights, but should they always win? Or should the government always win? And really the better question is, what is good? What is true? What is right? What is beautiful? And that has to be our standard, because parents can be wrong and the government can be wrong. And ultimately the hill that we're dying here on is not parents are always right, because, you and I are parents. We're not abusing our kids, but we know that parents can make mistakes. But there has to be a standard, right? And I think the thing that we lean on is not primarily the right of parents, but the fact that some things are good for us as a creation order matter, and some things are not good for us. And cutting off the genitals of children in pursuit of mental health is not bad because I don't prefer it. It's bad because it violates God's laws for how humanity is supposed to operate, and I'm not afraid to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And you and I, we're both Christians. We both stand on the Bible and believe what it says about God and who he is, and that he created us, and the way that he created us in our bodies is not wrong. And that to go against what he has revealed to us in our bodies is not going to be a recipe for thriving. And yet those arguments are not helpful when we're talking to a lot of people who say, hey, that's great for you that you believe in the Bible, but I don't. Okay. So then we do have to appeal to logic and science. And there actually is a lot of science that's coming out about sort of the effects of these gender transition treatments for minors. We know that if you let the children, if you don't intervene and try to move them towards the opposite gender, that a large majority of them, I think 90%, will over time become comfortable with their body.
Right.
And so we do have a lot of science, and there have been a lot of dominoes that have fallen, especially in Europe. And there was the Cass report a couple of years ago, and other European countries have followed suit. And so that's been really helpful. And it's very unfortunate that there were a lot of children who this kind of ideology took hold, and they were funneled down these paths of mutilating their bodies. But now we are getting more data as this has been done more, and we are seeing actually these people don't have better outcomes. They don't. This actually is harmful, and it's sort of proving out what you and I would say we knew all along.
Yeah, because of the creation order realities that are above our pay grade as people and as politicians and as governments is as the creation rather than the creator, we don't make the rules in significant ways, especially when it comes to our biology, and we didn't make ourselves.
We don't decide who our parents are.
Correct.
We don't decide where we're born. We don't decide what our body looks like or what our gender is. There are many.
What century you're born into.
You know, we freedom is good, but we don't have ultimate freedom. We obviously have many restrictions placed on us in reality.
You mentioned what the science, quote unquote, and we talked about Fauci being the science, right? And our friends on the left say they love science, and sometimes I think they actually do. But the reason why the science is not helpful and is not persuasive in this issue, on this particular issue, and why even if there's loads of science showing that these kind of surgeries are not actually beneficial to children, will not change their mind, is because the foundation upon which their entire worldview is built is the idea that my feelings are always in charge. And because if the science says that there are times in your life where you should ignore your feelings and not do that because 30 years from now that's going to be really bad for you, they don't care. Because the feelings need to be in charge now, because we need to be happy now. And what my feelings tell me now is that I need those chemicals and I need that operation to make me happy, and therefore give it to me. That's what establishes my constitutional right. And so it really is like
it's a perversion. Issue. Well, and it's a perversion of what is freedom. You know, as Americans, we're the land of the free, you know, and we want to be free, and we want to be free from the government. But does that mean that we should throw off all restraints? And of course, no one would say that. There are all
the libertarians would.
Well, no, I don't think the libertarians are okay with murder.
Well, I've talked
no
to,
one.
Yeah, no, I take your point. You're
no
right.
one thinks there should be
radical.
no one thinks there should be no restrictions, right? And so the question is, how do we decide what those restrictions are, and how do we know what is good for man?
And that was easier as a culture to decide when we had a common point of reference, when we were generally a Christian culture, even if not theologically all Christians. We had a shared understanding that, someone made us. There are rules to the universe. There are boys, there are girls. Those are different things. We understand what they are, and they're not within our jurisdiction to control, right? So when we had those shared set of beliefs about what truth is, and it exists outside of us, not inside of us, then it was easier to organize ourselves. But one of the reasons why we're having these debates now rather than 50 years ago is because 50 years ago, there weren't so many of us that convinced that truth was actually found and determined and defined by our feelings, and therefore we had a constitutional right to do whatever we felt like doing. And so, yes, it's always been ultimately an issue of what is right and what is wrong, and somebody's going to win that debate politically. But now we don't agree on what is right and what is wrong in much more significant ways.
That takes me to something that I looked at a couple weeks ago. This new Pew Research data about what Americans think is morally right and morally wrong. And I'm about to quote a statistic that has been the case for several years and I think is so interesting. It's been about this way. 90% of Americans believe that married people having an affair is morally wrong. That's not an earth-shattering fact, and yet
That's good.
It tells us something, though. It tells us that people don't actually think, well, whatever you feel like is right is right. People don't like to be cheated on.
Well, fair.
And it also tells us that people understand there's something special about marriage and sexuality, and that it is an exclusive relationship. And I just think in a culture and in a society where there's so much that we don't agree on, and there is so much confusion, we still have this shared understanding that there's something special and different about marriage and sex, and that it should be exclusive, and that is a basis of trust, and that it is a commitment, and that and it's not just whatever you feel is right is right. There are some things that are kind of off limits to people.
And it also shows that the relativists aren't actually relativists. They make the argument that we should be able to, that morality is a social construct and subjective when they don't want to be told what to do, and they want the freedom to do whatever they want to do. But they will make the moral arguments that that is wrong in all cases and in all times when they stand to be the victim. And when they want to say, is it wrong for my partner to cheat on me? Yes, because that would be terrible for me.
Right.
Is it right for me to do the thing that I want to do? In all times, yes. Is it a duplicity? Of course it is. Is it hypocritical? Of course it is. But that's the way relativists kind of operate, that there are no morals when I want to be free. There are morals when I want to make sure you don't do the thing that will hurt me.
Right.
And ultimately, morality doesn't make sense if there isn't an author. And that's the challenge that those who try to be secularists run into. Is I have a very
because we're all self-interested,
and for whatever reason I have a very strong moral compass inside of me, even though I claim to be an atheist. I mean, it might be about different things. It might be about your racism or your refusal to recycle, but I still have like moral indignation that arises from within me, which is irrational if there is no God. You can't explain where it comes from. They just feel it, right? But they want to deny that there is a standard of ultimate truth because they don't want to be accountable to it. They just want to leverage it whenever it's like, hey, you're doing the thing that is really bothersome to me right now. Let's move on to the next case because we got two more to go through here in the next couple of minutes. And let's go to Mahmoud next because it is, I think, most closely related to what we've already been talking about with Childs, with conversion therapy bans and speech censorship and Scrimeti. Is there a constitutional right to cut off your genitals? And then Mahmoud, which is a case out of Maryland, which essentially said, and this is kind of common sense, SCOTUS said parents have a right to know if sexually explicit material is going to be read to their kid at school, which doesn't seem controversial, but you did have a school district there that was saying, no, we shouldn't have to tell the parents that we're going to read like Timmy has 6 daddies kind of stuff.
Doesn't it go a little further than that, though, and say that the parents have a right to opt out?
Yes.
Not just no, but
Correct.
also to opt out.
Yeah, that they have a right to remove their children. And what's interesting is that the school district in I'm blanking on the name of this. Montgomery County. Thank you. Montgomery County, Maryland, their school district, they had actually adopted a policy giving people the right to opt out. And oddly, this was not primarily because of a bunch of Christians in Montgomery County. It was a bunch of Muslims. The Muslim community,
I remember that,
was
yes.
and that's why the case is called Mahmoud, right? Because that was the plaintiff. They had a policy of notifying parents and allowing them to opt out. Was it popular? Well, the policy was very popular.
Were people opting out?
Yeah, that was the problem.
Yeah.
So many parents opted their children out of this kind of, I don't know how pornographic it was, but it was highly offensive to them. It was, all the gender identity, sexuality stuff that we are sadly kind of familiar with. So many parents opted out. They said, we can't have you opting out. We need to teach the little people
that
this
was
stuff.
Actually
and so then they removed
their
the policy.
argument before the court. This is too burdensome for us to
Yeah.
create this alternative because so many people want it.
We so badly want to give their children this filth that we will, too many of them objected. Therefore, we will assert our right as the school district to parent their children how we see fit, doggone it.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court said, actually, school district, it's the parents who are in charge.
So how is this issue with curriculum in schools and all that, how has it played out in North Carolina?
Well, we're dealing with the same stuff right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the issue is there was legislation passed last session that
HB 805.
which requires school districts to publish a list of bills or a list of books,
Yes.
in the library so parents can see them and see what is being offered to their children and then specifically opt out of literature that they don't think is appropriate for their kids. It's not as far as everyone wanted. It's frankly not as far as what we wanted as an organization. But
And
yes, the issue is very much alive in North Carolina and in the rest of the country.
Yes.
So, but the question of should parents have the right to know, and I think it's just
No, and opt out.
And opt out.
Because we're talking about public school education.
That's right.
That's supposed to be for everyone.
So that's exactly right. And there's just this general hostility to inclusion. It's I'm going to socially transition your child at school, and we're not going to tell you we're going to change their names and their pronouns, and they're going to change their clothes when they get here, and everybody's going to act like she's a boy while at school, and then she's going to change and go back home, and we're just going to conspire against the parents, right? This has become a theme in the sexual revolution of having the government be the partner that helps the child, that separates the child from
because
the
they
parents.
know better than the parents who are
because undoubtedly
backwards and
Yes.
bigoted and all of that, all of those arguments that we're used to hearing.
because bureaucrats love our kids more than we do. They're sure of it, and they'll tell you about it. Last case, though, and this is kind of related, but it's different. Paxton, out of Texas, age verification laws for pornography. And this is something where statistically, I actually think there is more support for this, but it's still a strange argument. Most adults do not want their children to see pornography. And about half the states, there's a trend here, right? About half the states, blue states, red states, we kind of know how this falls, have passed age verification laws saying that pornography websites have to have their users prove that they're adults before they can get on the website. And the porn industry said that's unconstitutional. We have, I guess 12-year-olds have a constitutional right to access pornography. And the Supreme Court said, actually, it's okay if we have these rules are not an unconstitutional restraint on free speech, which is what they were saying, that somehow the pornography distributors have the right to have no obstacles to their products at all. And the Supreme Court said the interest in protecting the innocence of children is enough.
Praise God for that.
Yes, correct. And it's so common sense.
You can't undo that. You cannot undo the damage that comes from a child being exposed to that kind of material at a young age. You can help them, but you can't go back, And obviously, protecting children's innocence is of a high importance. Yes.
And there's a couple things I want to work through here, right? Because this is like, freedom of access, freedom of speech. The first case we talked about was you therapist may not say that it's possible to overcome your gender dysphoria, right? They wanted to censor speech of the therapists, but they are, in this other case, so committed to free speech that there can be no obstacles to the access of pornography on the internet, even if it involves an 8-year-old. Right? That's the kind of the duplicity. But
you know what's so ironic about that is that a lot, and I've talked to people who this is the case. There are times when actually access to this kind of content on the internet is what gets a child started down this bad road of gender identity confusion and problems with sexuality, like actually being exposed to these and to people who are groomers. And
Ashley, let me jump in and highlight that point that you just made, because there was a lawmaker in Minnesota, and I'm forgetting his name. It's a transgender lawmaker who I think it's a man pretending to be a woman, but he made that point in committee because Minnesota had their own age verification law, spoke up against it in committee specifically because he said for trans kids, porn is their sex education. That was the point he was making, that we have to make this available to children because how else are they going to get educated about transgenderism and all sorts of other things? So yeah, that was so not sad. You are not making that up. That is an argument that an actual elected official in Minnesota made in public committee.
I'm speechless. It's awful.
Truly.
It's really sad. I mean, children shouldn't be sexualized in any way whatsoever, let alone.
But that is a moral position. When you say that children shouldn't be sexualized in any way, not everybody agrees with that. Like that lawmaker in Minnesota and a whole bunch of other people. Now, there's a lot of more reasonable people, I think, on the left, and we passed some, pornography regulation here in North Carolina in the last couple of years. And there were people who in other ways identify on the left who are moms who are like, yeah, I don't want my 12-year-old watching porn. And if we can stop that, I mean, and so there is still a middle ground here, but the reality is there's a significant number of people in the country who see pornography as a moral good and are not all that troubled by the idea of children being exposed to pornography because they think sex is a moral good and everything that it leads to, pleasure, satisfaction, autonomy, self-expression, all of those things are things that we should not be concerned about. We should not be leery
I can give you statistics on that too from the Pew Research Center. 52% of Americans think that viewing pornography is morally wrong.
52%.
52%. So that leaves...
That's actually higher than I would expect.
15% believe it's morally acceptable, and 32% believe it's not a moral issue.
What was that number that said it's not a moral issue?
Not a moral issue, 32%.
Yeah, and that's
15% think it's morally acceptable. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess you combine that 47%, either think it's not a moral issue at all, or it's actually
exactly
a moral good. So that is a real cultural divide.
It is. It absolutely is.
Not just how we think about pornography, but how we think about sex in general and the role that it plays in our lives and in culture. And I think,
to me, that's 47% of people didn't affirm that viewing pornography is morally wrong. That's close to half of the country think there's nothing wrong with viewing pornography. It's interesting.
Those are the disciples of Freud and the disciples of Freud, because Freud assured us, and the sexual revolution really picked this up, that the best path to happiness is through genital satisfaction, essentially. And that is what the left
But no one wants to be cheated on, Joseph.
But no. Well, and therein in part lies the problem.
Got
right?
some tension there.
There is tension, but I think it's the common ground we can acknowledge here with our friends on the left and even the sexual revolutionaries is they sincerely want people to be happy. They do. And I think that's most of their motives. And there's some real perversion and there's real evil, but there's also just a lot of people who want people to be happy. And it seems like this is doing what you want to do is the right way to be happy.
Yeah.
You and I, we also want people to be happy.
There is a commonality there in terms of the end goal. The difference is, how are we getting there?
That is the entire difference.
Yeah.
What is the path to happiness? Is it, as our catechism would say, it's to glorify God and enjoy him forever.
You don't think the state of Colorado should tell us?
Well, they'd like to, right? But the people who oppose, who want children to see pornography or who want to, remove parents from the curriculum decisions so that the school can kind of disciple young minds as they want in kind of sexual revolutionary philosophy, they want kids to be happy also. They just think the best way to be happy is to do exactly what you feel like doing, whatever you want to. From a biblical perspective, when Jeremiah tells us that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, what that's reminding us is that following your heart is often the path to misery. And I think there's lots of evidence of that. But what we have in common is everybody does want our friends and neighbors and each other to be happy. We just have a very different idea of what leads to happiness. And so for us as believers, that's where we need to take the question back to, even before we start talking about gender and all the stuff in school books,
right?
The curriculum debates. The underlying question is, what do you think the path to happiness is? Which leads back to your worldview,
what leads to human flourishing,
your theology, right? Once we agree on the answer to that question, then some of these decisions.
And that's the conversation that we do need to be having, and we are having as a society.
We are, and I think that's a much more constructive conversation for people who want to understand why they disagree with their relatives at Thanksgiving,
right,
at Christmas, why they disagree with some of the other parents in their kids' class. They have a different understanding of the path to happiness than you do, and once you break that down, you also have the common ground. Makes the conversation easier because it's like, oh, you want me to be happy? Well, I want you to be happy. That's great. What do we think the path to happiness is? That's more comfortable, but it's also, it's more meaningful.
It's a little bit of a conversation stopper, though, when they say, oh, you're just a bigot.
Yes. No, that's true. I mean, and there are some people you can't be reasonable.
That's what we need to get past,
That's what we need to, and the response to that is always, tell me why you feel that way.
Yeah.
And let them explain it.
Yeah.
And, it's not true, but you can't always persuade people to see the world the way it should be seen.
Okay. So, Joseph, pivoting a little bit here, can you explain to us how the seeds of this, well, culturally, they started long ago, but all of these cases that we've talked about today, can you explain to us how this stems from the 2015 Obergefell decision?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's an important, point to make here in all this. In 2015, Obergefell, for those who are not familiar with Supreme Court case names, that is the case that redefined marriage for the whole country. And that was where the Supreme Court invented a right to marry somebody of the same sex, because until 2015, the Constitution, of course, is at least on its face silent on the question of marriage, doesn't define it. States had been defining it however they wanted. And then between like 2008 kind of in 2015, a number of states had chosen to redefine marriage. And then in 2015, the Supreme Court said, actually, it's unconstitutional to define marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman because there is a constitutional right to marry somebody of the same gender. And that was when you saw the dam break on everything else, because there had been a political industry that had been created or started somewhere in the 70s or 80s, and the whole goal was to accomplish what they accomplished in the Obergefell decision. And once the Supreme Court did that, they did not intend to go away and disappear. And so they pivoted. And that's what allowed all these other conversations to start taking place. That's why right after 2015, you started seeing all the trans characters on TV. Bruce Jenner did his thing, very famously. You kind of saw all of the mainstream media embrace this idea of men in makeups and just kind of blurring gender lines, and the gender issue became a big one. And the trans movement would have never happened without Obergefell, because that was the thing that signaled, okay, now it's time to pivot because we've conquered that ground. Now there's new ground that we need to conquer. So yes, once Obergefell embraced this idea that feelings are primary, and the Supreme Court basically wrote that you can be anything that you want, and the purpose of the family and of marriage is not some social good, it's individual good. We've elevated individual good over social good. That just broke the floodgates for everything else, and that's why we're now having people say in Tennessee, I have a constitutional right to remove my child's genitals.
And that brings us to the Greater Than campaign, which our organization, NC Values, has joined that effort. And essentially the Greater Than campaign, the goal is to overturn Obergefell,
which I think is interesting.
It is interesting. It's one of those things where a lot of people have been saying, okay, that ship has sailed, that has been decided. So it's interesting that this campaign is coming in this moment. Mm-hmm. But the key argument that is being made is that children's needs are greater than adults' desires, that children deserve a mother and a father, even that children have a right to a mother and a father. In ideal circumstances, we shouldn't intentionally create situations where children do not have both a mother and a father. And I think an interesting thing that has come about as people have talked about rights, we often get told that we're against trans rights at NC Values because we want to take away their rights. But when you allow a man to go in a woman's bathroom, you're taking away the right of that woman to safety and privacy and taking and dignity. And so here you see people saying, okay, you have a right to marry, whoever you want, and the states can't take that away from you. That's what the Supreme Court said, essentially. But what about the rights of the children? Once you say that these people have this right, okay, well, you're taking away the rights of someone else. And that's why when you frame things in terms of rights, you can't just stop there, because you have to think about, what is the good here? What is the priority? What is our end goal? And we have to say that children and their needs being met is primary.
Well, we don't have to say that, because we are not presently saying that. I mean, you and I would agree with that, but the entire, we keep going back to this theme of,
if you have two menu options, how can you say that? I mean, it feels so wrong to say that we don't care about the needs and the rights of children.
Well, it does feel wrong if the implication of that claim that children's rights matter means that the relationship between two men is not the same as a relationship between a man and a woman, then that is wrong. And that's what we have decided culturally, because that hurts our feelings, because the whole goal of the sexual revolution is to create sameness where the difference is very obvious, but it feels mean to me to be told that my relationship is different than your relationship.
Well, it is different. I mean, there's no way around that.
But the whole purpose of Obergefell was to say it is not different,
right,
which is why the law may not treat them differently. Now, scientifically, morally, culturally, in every way, we know that they are different. But the whole purpose of the sexual revolution was to establish, as a matter of legal principle, these are not different, therefore you cannot treat them differently. They don't care about the implications. Because at the time, and we've talked about speech, right? You cannot, the rights of florists and bakers and all of the lawsuits and business owners who object to that. Well, you will be made to conform. You will be made to celebrate. You will be made to comply, because your rights as a conscientious objector do not exist if they come into conflict with the feelings of other people. So that entire movement then and now continues to be, will the government affirm the desire of people in same-sex relationships to believe that my relationship is in every way the same as everybody else's relationship? And that's kind of the legal fiction that Obergefell created.
Yeah. Well, and it's two women may have a child and both love that child, but you cannot say that is the same thing as having a mother and a father. It's clearly not. And that's the whole transgender conversation. Yeah. Actually, you do have a gender. Actually, it is what it is. Yeah. These things just are not the same.
Well, I agree with you, of course, but we're selling this to a culture that really, from my perspective, doesn't necessarily care about what's true. Yeah. We are not primarily logical beings, and and I keep going. I've been reading, through the book of through the Gospels recently, and one of the things that I have really taken note of in how the Pharisees treated Jesus was right after he raised Lazarus from the dead. They gathered and had a conversation about what they were going to do, not because they were convinced Jesus was not the Messiah because he was raising dead people, walking on water, healing the lame and the sick. But they thought the case was so strong that the truth that he might be the Messiah was so troublesome to them and their identity and their cultural power.
What were they going to lose, Joseph?
They were going to lose so much.
Lose?
Yes, it wasn't, we're here to convince everybody that Jesus is not the Messiah. We're afraid that he is and what that will cost us. And the takeaway for us in all of these conversations is people don't deny the truth because they're certain it's not true. They very often deny the truth because they're afraid that it is true. And that's the culture that we're dealing with right now is I'm terrified of what the science on transgenderness says. I'm terrified that the science might conclude that children actually do need a mother and father. So when you raise that argument, I'm not going to disagree with you because I know you're wrong. I'm going to disagree with you because I'm afraid you might be right. And if you are right and that requires me to change, that's not something I'm willing to do. So I'm just going to say you're wrong, even if I have no basis to say
Well, I mean, I agree with you in part. I think there will be some people who are unwilling to change no matter what the cost. But I think what we're seeing here, especially with this it's been sort of a tipping point with the transgender piece. A lot of Americans are like, hey, we're not willing to give up women's
Agreed.
sports. And I do think actually people are kind of seeing some of the real world effects of what's been done here, all the things that have happened since Obergefell and the whole gender ideology movement. I do think that the real world impacts of it has affected people.
I agree with you. And so what I just described, I don't think that describes everyone, but that describes some people.
Of course.
Right? And so we just need to be aware. And the fact that the only reason we're doing this is because we think some people are persuaded and interested in reality, right?
That's right.
So I don't expect to persuade everybody, but I think there are enough people who are paying enough attention to the world as it actually is, who want to know what's true, who want to know what's good, who want to know what's going to lead them and their family into, flourishing and God's design for humanity, that they will respond positively to good arguments and to evidence and to facts and all of those things. But I have no expectation that everybody will because I'm from Seattle. So we're going to probably have to finish this conversation, another time. But this has been great.
Yeah, it has been great.
So, friends, thank you for joining us here on Politics for Happy People. I want to remind you, as we get started, one of the most helpful things you can do for us is to like and subscribe wherever you have found us. And if you have the ability to rate us and give us 5 stars, that helps a ton because you train the algorithm to like us. And if the algorithm likes us, then other people find out about us and they can join the Politics for Happy People family. So if you can do that, it's a huge help. Reminder that new episodes drop every Tuesday and Friday. And we look forward to seeing you next time here on Politics for Happy People.